You are listening to the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast, a podcast for Freemasons and the public, bringing you to light through discussions and research papers about Australian Freemasonry and the Victorian jurisdiction in particular.
Welcome back to the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast. This is your host, Brother Jack Aquilina, and I'm very lucky to be joined this week again with Brother Steve Austin. Hello, Steve.
G'day, Jack. How you going, brother?
It's good to have you back, Steve. To our listeners, this is going to be a bit of a unique episode. As you know, over the last 6 episodes we've kept it quite substantial. We've had some very interesting discussions about the 3 craft degrees, the trowel, religion and Freemasonry, and also what exactly is Freemasonry. This episode is going to be more based on research and readings from some of my favourite Masonic publications. And the purpose of that is because we want to be able to provide you research papers as much as we do discussions. But rest assured, if you enjoy our discussions, in the coming weeks we're going to be having some fantastic discussions, which I'm happy to flag. We're going to be hosting an episode on Rosicrucianism. This includes Masonic Rosicrucianism, also the non-Masonic Rosicrucians, which is very interesting, and I'll leave that for the episode on there. We'll also be interviewing the immediate past Grand Master, Most Worshipful Brother Hillel Benedict, who will be very kindly giving us his time to talk about his time as Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of Victoria. We'll also talk about his religion. He was one of the very few Jewish Grand Masters of Victoria, and how that's had an impact on his Masonic career, and also asking him some general questions about where he thinks the future of Freemasonry will be. We'll also be hosting an episode or a discussion, one of our first contested discussions that we'll be having as an interest for listeners, which will be on the topic, is Freemasonry inherently conservative? So that will be very interesting. We're going to be getting one brother in to say it is, and another brother to say it isn't. Obviously, there'll be a lot of devil advocates playing there. The idea is to promote some discussions so listeners get to listen to something a bit interesting, because we know that a debate always stimulates good discussion, and that's what this whole podcast is about. And finally, we'll be hosting a very exciting episode with some members of Le Troit du Humain, which is the co-masonry body of Freemasonry, which is an international order that admits men and women into its order, which meets here in Australia. There's an Australian federation, and we'll be hosting one male, one female of that order on this podcast to talk about the role of women in Freemasonry, why some of these irregular as such groups exist, and some differences between mainstream Freemasonry, such as United Grand Lodge Victoria, and some of their practices. So, an exciting program ahead, Steve.
There's some awesome stuff coming up, Jack. We've bombarded them with information about the basics and the first 3 degrees, and it's been awe-inspiring stuff. So I'm looking forward to hearing these research papers today, which I've perused and very interesting. But what's coming on is Brought to Light is bringing you to light.
Exactly right, and we hope that this podcast can do a little bit different things to other podcasts. I know other podcasts focus on casual conversations and research papers. We want to bring you some intellectually stimulating ideas, and it doesn't have to be for someone who's an academic Freemason. Any sort of practical Freemason will hopefully get a lot out of what we're doing. So it's good to see we've got a good program ahead, and I know that you'll be co-hosting on a couple of those, won't you, Steve? So
I'll be hanging around. Can't get rid of me now.
That's good. Well, it's good to have you on board. Before we commence, we'll just start with a bit of news. As we discussed last episode, Steve, you're the Northern District President for the Blue Lounge Social Club.
Yes.
And as you know, there's going to be some exciting news regarding the Maroondah District Social Club, and also the Greater Gippsland region.
Indeed.
So I'm happy to announce that the Maroondah District will be hosting its first meeting, its launch, on the 3rd of September at the Inner Eastern Masonic Centre, which is in Box Hill on Whitehorse Road, starting from 6:30pm. It'll include drinks, trivia, and I also believe live music. So it'll be good fun. It'll be good to see our friends out there starting up a new initiative out there and continuing the Blue Lounge tradition.
We're going to see you rip up the guitar that night, are we, brother?
Yes, we'll give it a crack. I'll see if I can practice some chords and see what happens. But it'll be really good. And
I'm not dusting off my saxophone, I'm telling you that right now.
Well, I think I'd pay to see that, but that'd be pretty good. But I mean, one thing that's also happening, which I know Steve is particularly excited about, is the president of the Greater Gippsland Blue Lounge Social Club, Brother Simon Reynolds. He's a fantastic guy. he has told me that they'll be launching their first meeting in Traralgon on the 7th of October, in which we have to thank Brother Jordan Mercer for being able to allow some of us city folk to go up there and sleep somewhere, because he actually has a place down there. So you must be looking forward to that, a weekend in Traralgon.
Oh, well, we'll rug up. The weather will be going a bit better, but Blue Lange banging it on the bush should be a good night. It'll
be good to see how they do it. One of the reasons we're doing this sort of shorter episode focusing on research papers is because we're off to Sydney, aren't we?
We are indeed. We're loosening up the shoulders and we're flying out tomorrow.
Yeah, we're going to be seeing Brother Luke Spickler be raised to the 3rd degree at Lodge Thespian, which is going to be at Petersham in Sydney. By the time this podcast is released, it will have already happened. So, Luke, we hope you enjoyed our company and you had a fantastic raising. It was, I'm sure we would have enjoyed it. And we're looking forward to getting up to Sydney to experiencing something a little bit different.
A little bit different, yeah. It's going to be a bit of a torn... for me, I'm a New South Welshman, technically.
Yeah, so you're from New South Wales.
But I'm representing Victoria, so it's going to be interesting for me. But we're also getting a visit there. There's another brother from New South Wales coming to say good day to us.
Yeah, no, that's true. And we got an email from one of our listeners, and this sort of shows you that this podcast is being listened to not only around the world, but also in different states in Australia. I'd like to do a shout out for Brother Stephen Lowry. He's the Worshipful Master-elect being reinstalled at the Leichhardt Lodge, number 133, on the Register of the United Grand Lodge of New South Wales and the Australian Capital Territory.
Home of the mighty Balmain Tigers.
The home of the Balmain Tigers. And Brother Steve sent us a wonderful email asking us to do a bit of a shout out. So we're doing a shout out for Brother Steve, but especially we want to do a shout out for his installation. So Brother Steve Leary will be reinstalled on Wednesday the 21st of September at the Concord Masonic Centre, number 315 Concord Road, Concord West, New South Wales, 2138 is the postcode. They'll be tiling at 6:30pm. Visitors will be admitted into the lodge at 6:45, and the Grand Lodge team, which hopefully will include the Grand Master of New South Wales, will be coming in the lodge room at about 7:15pm.
And ACT, Jack.
Don't forget the
ACT.
Can't forget the Australian Capital Territory. And consideration, or the cost for attending the South, will be about $25. And they'll be obviously hosting what he says here, that great Masonic tradition, the swindle, which is basically the raffle, which I'm sure will be a lot of fun. Brother Steve is saying that he's looking forward to seeing as many brethren there as possible. And just as a bit of information about Brother Steve is a train driver. So he said railway transport brethren, or anyone who's travelling and happens to be working in that industry, are all welcome to attend. So thank you, Brother Steve, for listening to our podcast. We hope that you're enjoying it and all your New South Wales brethren are enjoying the podcast. And we hope that a lot of people can get to your installation. And we're always happy to do a shout out for our listeners. Steve, I think you've got something to say about a friend of yours who's having an installation in New South Wales.
Well, it's just these great brothers all named Stephen, isn't it, really?
Yes, yeah.
I'm Steve Austin, or Stephen by birth, but Worship Brother Stephen Hall, brother Stephen Philip Hall, is going in the chair at the Central Lodge, Lodge Central Australia, number 88 in Burke, New South Wales. Now, I'll give you a quick brief history on how I met Stephen. And it's a very Stephen story, so you've got to keep up with the Stephens, because there's about 4 Stephens in this story.
So for our listeners, I think when Steve, you refer to yourself, maybe refer to yourself as Stone Cold.
So Brother Stone Cold's in Melbourne here, that's me. And Brother Stephen Hall and I met on Facebook, or I got a message Christmas Day or Boxing Day last year, and Stephen Hall's stepson, Stephen Whitmore, has outed Brother Stone Cold Steve as a Freemason. So I get a friend request from this gentleman who actually lives in Broken Hill and says, I'm coming down for a lodge meeting. I've met another Stephen online from England. And Brother Stephen Dye, is his name, was over for a holiday, and his partner gave him 1 day to visit a lodge meeting while they were on holiday. So they found a lodge meeting down at Mornington here in Victoria, and Stephen Hall drove down from Broken Hill, which is a decent drive of a good 12 to 13 hours, I think, and stayed down here. They were on holiday with his partner, and he came and picked me up, and we drove down to Mornington, which is about an hour drive from the side of Melbourne I live on, and we visited this lodge, which is actually one of the oldest lodges in Victoria. Lodge Mornington, I can't think of the year, 18-something though, 1854 rings a bell. So it's been around, so that's how the three Stephens went out and we all met for the first time, but due to Freemasonry we all had that in common. So we've organised a bit of a trip up to go visit him, Jack, haven't we? What have you noted? Mexicans Going North.
Mexicans Going North is the name of the event. We're heading up to see the installation at Central Australia Lodge. What's the date for that? 24th of August?
Saturday the 27th of August.
27th of August.
It's an afternoon start at 3 p.m. So we've got there'll be official by the immediate past Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of New South Wales and Australian Capital Territory, Jack.
And Australian Capital, we can't forget the Australian Capital Territory, and that'll be fantastic. We're looking up about 4 or 5 of us, Master Masons and an entered apprentice from Melbourne will be heading up. So
we've got some non-Masons attending as well.
And a non-Mason, there you go.
It's an event they've done before. It's a bit of a charity raiser, so non-Freemasons are invited. While we're doing our kick bit, as we like to call it, with our aprons on and doors closed, there's a cruise on the PV Jandra paddle boat with champagne, beer and soft drinks for the non-Masons. So I don't know, I might have to lose my apron on the way there, Jack. I might have to go on the cruise.
Sounds like the non-Masons are having more fun than the Masons. That's
so we'll have Stephen Whitmore, Stephen Hall's stepson, will be going up, and his mother has actually organised the paddle boat part, and we've got our friend Tony, a non-Freemason, who's been to a few things, but he keeps coming along, Jack. So I don't know, he keeps coming. So
hopefully that means a
we
petition.
never know. But that's going to be Saturday the 27th of August. So if anyone in New South Wales feels like a bit of a drive, send us an email and we can hook you up with Brother Stephen Hall at Lodge Central Australia, number 88, Burke, New South Wales.
So that's great. So basically, unofficially, and just so our overseas listeners know, in Australia, like every other country, there's a rivalry between Victoria and New South Wales. In fact, the Australian Capital Territory is the capital of Australia. They put it halfway between Sydney and Melbourne. It's still in New South Wales, though, but it's halfway between Sydney and Melbourne, just so...
As the crow flies.
Yeah, as the crow flies, just to sort of represent the rivalry between our two states. But unofficially, the New South Welshmen have taken over this episode, haven't they? So that's good. You're from New South Wales originally, aren't you?
Well, I was born in Melbourne. We don't admit that too often, but I grew up in the Southern Riverina, a small town called Tocumwal, so just in New South Wales, but I'm an avid Blues supporter and 10 years of pain, thanks to those Queenslanders as state of origin, but that's a story for another time.
Exactly right. Well, okay, we'll get stuck into the episode of the readings today. We've got some great readings. The first reading is actually from a really good friend of mine, Brother Owen Shieh of Honolulu Lodge, and I actually met Owen when I travelled to Honolulu and went to their installation. Fantastic Freemason. He wrote an excellent book, which I all recommend you buy. It's called Journey on the Level, and you can access it via his website. Just type Journey on the Level into Google, or jump on our Facebook, and we'll actually share a link to Owen's Facebook page in the show notes.
Yes.
And this book is a absolutely fantastic book. It talks about Freemasonry as part of a journey of his life, and he's really into the outdoors and travelling. So I hope you enjoy it. Since this podcast is called Brought to Light, we're reading a portion of his first chapter, which is called From Darkness to Light, and I hope you enjoy. From Darkness to Light, the Cave. Imagine a group of men sitting on chairs inside a cave, facing the interior wall. These men have lived in this cave their entire lives, never once stepping foot outside. They were born and raised here. Furthermore, they have always sat in these chairs, not able to move any limbs or even to turn their heads, because they are physically chained to the chairs. Behind them lies the opening to the cave, where there exists a blazing fire. In front of the fire, on the side facing the cave, people walk by with various figures made of stone and wood. Shadows of these figures are cast against the interior wall of the cave, which the men see with their eyes. The noises from outside the cave echo from the wall and reach their ears as reflections of sound. With their limited senses and perspectives, they speak to each other and describe the shadows they see before them. They take those shadows to be true representations of reality. They name them, they study them, they grow fond of some whilst rejecting others. They debate and argue over the essence of the shadows. Some even get angry over their disagreements about what the shadows represent. After much study, a select few of the men begin to understand and predict the behaviour of the shadows and sounds. Since there is no knowledge of anything beyond, their counterparts praise them for their superior intellect and ability to understand the world. Now imagine that one of the men is released from the restraints and forced to exit the cave. At first he protests, not willing to let go of the images on the wall, because those shadows were his life and reality, and he knew it. But after some time outside the cave, he begins to understand and appreciate the abundance of colours, the warmth of the sun, and the glory of realising the essence of life beyond what society had once dictated to him. He learns to question, he learns to think critically, he learns to experience the truth of life, rather than simply relying on conjecture and blind faith. He understands the importance of practicing and walking the walk. He realises the foolishness of the men in the cave who spend their time arguing, bickering, hating, judging, and competing over their own interpretations of the shadows, not knowing that they are simply shadows, and that their interpretations are flawed. He loses his fear of confronting and questioning that which his counterparts have deemed just how life is supposed to be. Suppose this man returns to the cave. He greets the men who are still chained in their respective chairs and attempts to communicate what he had just experienced outside the cave. He tries his best to explain the colours, the sights, the sounds, the smells, and the feelings, but alas, he finds no words in the language of his fellow men that can adequately describe what he has just experienced. So he resorts to the use of allegory and symbolism, but he finds that most of them cannot seem to see past the symbols. They either take them too literally or they don't care for them at all. At his last resort, he encourages the men to join him on the journey out of the cave. They protest, as he once did. They question his motives. Their emotions and habits for judgment become habitually directed towards him. He is deemed to be either naive or an out-of-touch idealist. Worse, they accuse him of trying to impose his own crazy ideas upon the rest of them. He feels sorry for the men, but realises, out of compassion, that he was once in their shoes. The original version of this story was told a millennia ago by the Greek philosopher Plato. His famous allegory of the cave, found in his work The Republic, hauntingly describes the state of humanity. We are the men in the cave. We are the men who are chained to the chairs. We are the men who spend our entire lives seeing an illusion, a reflection of reality. This illusion is naturally brought about by our limited senses and perspectives, and yet our egos chain us to the chairs. We always think that we're right. It's us versus them. It's me versus you. It's, if you're not with me, then you're against me. And so the most frightening part is we do not even recognise our own situation. Rarely do we question societal norms. Rarely do we try to step outside the box and see things from a different perspective. Rarely do we see our own mistakes. Rarely do we acknowledge our own faults. And rarely do we learn from them. We spend our lives categorising things, conceptualising them, and passing judgment based on our own biases and limited perspectives. We spend our lives categorising things, conceptualising them, and then passing judgment based on our own biases and limited perspectives. Without even taking a brief moment to think from another's perspective, we readily misunderstand the full picture, the reality of a given situation. We disagree with our friends, we argue with our whys, we get angry at circumstances that do not follow our desires. We get frustrated at events we cannot control. In short, we misunderstand each other and ourselves all the time. And not once do we step back and wonder, what am I doing? We are the victims of ignorance. To deny this would be a further sign of ignorance. Ignorance is the perpetual human condition, symbolised by darkness. Ignorant is our habitual lack of understanding, empathy, and foresight. It is our state of not seeing the full picture. It is not being fully aware of the reality of life and the events contained therein. It is being inside a box or a cave without even knowing that we're in one. Furthermore, we are trapped by our egos. We think that what we perceive is unequivocally true, neglecting the fact that our perspectives are often limited. When we see the shadows on the wall, it's not that we refuse to question their nature, but rather we don't even recognise that they're shadows in the first place. We think that they're real. We think that that is all there is. We think how we feel about someone or something is real and absolute. But our feelings about people or things are nothing but our own mental images, shadows of reality, not reality itself. What we think may often not be how it is. Our thoughts are mental projections, like a picture on the wall created by an overhead projector in a classroom. Our mental thoughts are but only a partial reflection of reality. What we think is undeniable fact may often be only opinion. By confusing the projection of someone for the reality of that person, we give rise to interpersonal misunderstandings. I think that you're this, and you think that I'm such and such, and we both disagree about our personal assessments of each other, and the result? Conflict. We seek to satisfy our inner hunger for light, for understanding, for wisdom, for happiness, but like the hungry person who does not realise that he needs proper nourishment, and instead attempts to temporarily satisfy his hunger with junk food, we seek money, power, finance, fame, sensory pleasures, all of which bring about negative consequences, again because of our lack of foresight. And so we are trapped in a violent roller coaster of dualistic emotions, likes, dislikes, love, hatred, selfishness, envy, lasciviousness, unceasing turbulence of the mind that leads to vexation. This is not to say that a particular emotion is inherently good or inherently bad. Nothing is inherently anything. Rather, it is our confusion of what we really need for what we think we need that causes these vexations. Like those first rays of sun that shine through the dark clouds after a torrential thunderstorm, wisdom and understanding together serve as beacons of peace and sanity, chasing away the shadows of ignorance. With wisdom comes true and lasting happiness. This is where we begin. This is where we begin our journey from darkness to light. To acknowledge our state of ignorance is to take the first step of this journey. A person who is obese must first recognise his problem before he can begin a new diet and exercise regime. A miserly millionaire must first realise that money cannot enrich his heart before he can become willing to donate to charity. A person who seeks to quit smoking must first acknowledge the long-term health consequences of continuing. Without this self-realisation, nothing can be done to convince a person to change himself for the better. The change must come first from within. Otherwise, he'll put forth a level of resistance much like the men in the cave when asked to step outside. We cannot impose our beliefs on anyone, even if we think the beliefs are correct, even if we think we are trying to help by carrying the torch of virtue. Realization and inspiration cannot be forced. They must arise from within each individual. The most anyone else can do is to help support such inspiration. We each must walk our own journey. So what is this journey? Where are we going? What is the purpose? The journey that underlies the institution of Freemasonry is one that takes us inward. In order to build a better world and a more meaningful life, one first task must be to better understand ourselves. This is the purpose of the working tools of the entered apprentice. By divesting our minds and consciousness of all the vices and superfluities of life, we begin to uncover who we truly are, underneath all the emotions, all the vexations, and all the fleeting characteristics that change with time. Like the changing of the weather and the passing of the clouds, we confuse the temporary, our passing thoughts and emotions, for who we really are. It has been said that the Masonic Lodge itself represents the psyche of man. All the objects and events that occur in the Lodge are symbols for our mental formations, and so our Masonic journey is equivalent to an expedition of introspection. This is one that cannot be taken lightly. As Brother Winston Churchill said, courage is what it takes to stand up and speak, but courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. Our perpetual state of darkness has left us confused. Who are we? Why am I? Who am I? What am I doing? And what is the purpose of my life? Our inability to answer these questions causes a deep, gnawing feeling of emptiness in our minds that leads us to seek temporary solace in the material and the pleasurable, even though these things often do not bring us lasting fulfillment. This is not to say that the material and pleasurable are bad. The shadows in the cave are not bad. The issue at hand is that there is more to life than what we think. And that realization is the key to true happiness and fulfillment. Nothing is inherently all good or all bad, as the Masonic symbol of the checkered pavement teaches us. Or rather, it is the lack of understanding of the truth that lies behind the illusions that causes our vexations, like the men in the cave who argue and fight over the shadows that they see before them, but do not realize the futility of their judgments and passions. So what exactly are these shadows? And what can we do about our own shadows? To answer these questions, let us begin our journey away from the darkness of ignorance and into the light of wisdom through the help of Masonic symbolism. So that was a reading from Brother Owen Shieh's book, Journey on the Level. And once again, I suggest that you buy this. And even if you're really nice, you send Owen an email, I'm sure that he'll give you a signed copy.
Can I just borrow yours?
Yeah, no, I'm going to make you buy one, Steve.
Okay, he gets the rights, that's fine.
He gets the rights. So, Brother Owen Shieh, hope you're listening. Thank you for producing such a fantastic Masonic publication. Now, look, Steve, in that article, in that sort of chapter of Owen's book, he's talking about the journey from darkness to light, and he's using an example of a old sort of allegory from Plato, the Republic. Plato was an ancient Greek philosopher. He wrote a fantastic set of volumes called The Republic, which is influential on a lot of political leaders and philosophers. But in that, he talks about how, as human beings, we think we know it all. We think our perceptions...
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
And we think that our perceptions is everything, but sometimes we forget that there's more to the world than what we can see, think, and taste.
You can never know what you're going to get.
You never know what you're going to get.
So the weather, what the weather tells you, what mood the sheep are in.
Yeah.
Example being, you might go to work one day and you don't know what's going to happen, do you, really?
And your perceptions aren't everything. So I think the thing that Owen was talking about is, sometimes we think we know what we're talking about, or we notice an emotion, or someone says something, we think we know why they're doing it, why they're saying it.
That's exactly right.
We realise
we try to judge the book by its cover, don't we? From
do.
Human emotion, all the facial expressions, and having dealt with a lot of people over the years in hospitality, and a lot of it is body language, and don't quote me on this, but most customers you do have to treat like an idiot, because you're trying to suggestive sell, but they're not suggestive selling, they're just not making their mind up.
Exactly right.
And they're in a hurry.
Yeah.
So you're just trying to help, but you've got to help them in a way that you think help them think it's their idea.
Exactly right.
So you use that perception, obviously, and you are going to be wrong at times, but it is interesting how he covers it there.
Yeah, I mean, ignorance can be viewed in a lot of different ways, so it's interesting. So that was a fantastic reading. The next reading we're going to be doing is actually going to be a reading by Brother Steve, and it's going to be from Mark E. Koltko-Rivera's work, Freemasonry and Introduction, which is another fantastic book I encourage you all to buy. He's going to be reading a couple of things. First, he'll be talking about some of the myths about Freemasonry. So he'll be talking about, for example, do we really worship devils, and are we really part of an international conspiracy? And then he'll be reading a part about Masonic controversy. So why don't we let women into this organisation? Are we a religion? So this is very interesting, and I think that you'll enjoy the reading. And without further ado, here's a reading by Brother Steve Austin from Freemasonry Introduction, Mark E. Koltko-Rivera's
Masonic controversies. Like any sizable social organisation, Freemasonry has its controversial aspects. Women and Freemasonry. Mainstream Freemasonry is an all-male organisation. How can one defend the existence of an all-male organisation in the 21st century? How does this jibe with the Masonry's egalitarian ethos? Is the exclusion of women from the mainstream Freemasonry a form of sexism? Am I saying that there is no opportunities for initiatory experience for women within Freemasonry? I take three angles of the approach to these issues. Freemasonry has a right to be a fraternity. Mainstream Freemasonry has always defined itself as a fraternity, that is, an organisation for men. The guiding legends and the mythic structure of mainstream Freemasonry involve the builders of the ancient temple dedicated by King Solomon and medieval groups like the stonemasons of Europe and the Knights Templar. Mainstream Freemasonry conforms to all-male nature of those organisations. Mainstream Freemasonry has no more reason to apologise for being an all-male organisation than do the Boy Scouts of America. One frequently cited basis of criticism about an all-male organisation, such as some country clubs or business networking groups, is that they can restrict women from having access to the premises where business deals are negotiated, even informally. This isn't a legitimate issue, to be sure. However, it is not a serious concern for the Masonic Lodge, which simply is not a place where one's professional business. I have heard brethren actively discourage individuals from submitting petitions, i.e. applications, to become Freemasons because these individuals were primarily interested in networking for business purposes. Candidates are required to swear that their interest in Freemasonry is not based on motive of improving their business or financial position. The exclusion of women from these mainstream Freemasonry has a most minimal effect on women in business. There are Masonic affiliated organisations that involve women. Although mainstream Freemasonry itself is an all-male organisation, there are other organisations affiliated with but independent from Freemasonry that do admit women, sometimes exclusively. There are no ladies auxiliary organisations in that usual sense of the term. The organisations manage themselves and typically confer degrees or ceremonies of initiation on their members. They include the following: the Order of the Eastern Star, the Order of Aramathe, and the White Shrine of Jerusalem. The Eastern Star is an organisation of both Master Masons and their female relatives, like a spouse, sister, or descendant, who believe in the existence of a divine being. The Eastern Star in New York State does not require women to have Masonic connection. In New Jersey, members must be Christian. The Order of Almatra is a similar organisation. The White Shriners of Jerusalem is a similar organisation open to Christians. The Social Order of Burkant is an all-women's group, a ladies' fraternal order for female relatives of Master Masons who have obtained the Knights Templar degree within the York Rite, being affiliated with the Templars, the Heroes of Jericho, Ladies of Circle of Perfection, and the Syrian Crusaders. These are all women groups for female relatives of York Rite Masons of the Prince Hall of Affiliation. Respectively, there are female relatives of the Royal Ark Masons, Royal and Select Masters, and the Knights Templar within the York Rite. The Ladies of the Orient Shrine, the Daughters of the Nile, the Daughters of Isis. These are all women's groups for female relatives of Master Masons, who are all members of the Shriners. The Daughters of the Nile is associated with the Prince Hall affiliation. Order of the Golden Circle, this is an all-women's group for female relatives of the Prince Hall Scottish Rite Masons. Job's Daughter International and International Order of Rainbow for girls. These are youth groups for girls and young women. Job's Daughters is open to relatives of Freemasons. The Rainbow no longer requires a Masonic relative. Thus, there are initiatory experiences with the mainstream Masonic heritage that are open to women of all ages. Although these groups usually have an affiliation with Masonic Lodge, the adult groups, at the least, are administratively independent and are run by their own members. Alternate forms of Freemasonry involve women as well. There are alternative forms of Freemasonry outside of the mainstream that have admitted women for well over a century. Masonic lodges for men and women are known as such names as Co-Masonry or Le Joint Humain, French for human rights. Entire Grand Lodge organisations exist for all female lodges, such as the Grand Lodge Féminine de France and the Women's Grand Lodge of Belgium, which have chartered women's lodges in the United States and Canada. The Order of Women Freemasons reportedly includes 300 lodges, primarily in England. Anti-Masonry accusations versus truths. If one reads up on Freemasonry either in books or on the internet, it will not be long before one runs into all kinds of interesting, juicy, scandalous and completely inaccurate material about Freemasonry. Here I shall address a few of the more widespread, inaccurate accusations. I shall also indicate how some anti-Masonic writers operate, Freemasonry and religion in general. A great pile of inaccuracies about Freemasons concerns its relation to religion. I shall mention just a few. First of all, Freemasonry is not a religion. All that Masonry has to teach is that God lives, the soul is immortal, all men should live ethically, morally, and as brothers. This is hardly a religion. Freemasonry requires that anyone who applies to be a Mason must already believe in a supreme being. However, Masonry is up to the individual to consider with the nature of the supreme being. Freemasonry bans all discussions of sectarian religious doctrines in the lodge. Freemasonry is religious, but is not a religion. Yes, Masonry has some religious trappings. Freemasonry says all religions are alike. False. Men of all religious persuasions have equal rights in the lodge. The lodge also bans sectarian religious discussion. Therefore, some people think Freemasonry teaches that all religions are alike. This is utterly untrue. Freemasonry does not teach that all religions are alike or equally valid. Freemasonry does not teach that all religions are alike or equally valid or anything like that. To the contrary, Freemasonry recognises that such questions are outside its competence and that it has no right to say anything at all on these matters. Freemasonry is nature worship or deism. False. Some people claim that Masonry is actually a form of nature worship. Others teach that Freemasonry is a form of deism, a religious position where the divine being refrains from interfering in the natural unfolding of the universe. Whether one thinks of a deist God as an impersonal force like nature, or a personal being, a deist God does not grant revelation or produce miracles, and does not intervene in human history, petitionary prayer is a meaningless exercise in the deist universe. Deism was an important religious position in the early American Republic. However, the idea of a Freemason teaches deism is simply false. Freemasonry neither worships nature nor teaches deism. Some Masonic symbolism does draw lessons from the natural world, but Masons do not worship nature. Freemasonry makes no specific statements about the personal or impersonal nature of a supreme being at all. Accusations of devil worship. One of the more outrageous accusations made against Freemasonry alleges that Masonry involves devil worship. At the risk of mentioning what would be obvious to any lodge member, this accusation is not true in the slightest degree. This accusation is based on a deliberate hoax perpetrated over a century ago, a hoax that the hoaxer revealed himself during a well-attended press conference. A 19th century French pornographer trying to embarrass both the Catholic Church and the Freemasons wrote a volume of lies over a decade regarding Freemasonry under the name Leo. Taxiel made incredible lurid accusations, lodges visited by Satan, demonic spirits in the lodge, and so forth. When his hoax started to unravel, he called a press conference in Paris, attended by representatives of major French newspapers, and gleefully confessed to the whole thing. He thereby embarrassed the church, many of whose leaders had hailed Taxiel as a hero. Taxiel hated the church for a variety of reasons. In addition, he briefly had been a Mason, but had been thrown out of the lodge for unmasonic conduct. Thus, anti-Masonry then became the means of his anti-clerical activity. Taxiel happily confessed his hoax in 1897. Regrettably, many authors repeat his accusations as factual today. Freemasonry and international conspiracy. Freemasonry has been the target of conspiracy theorists for almost 300 years. The most terrible thing that has happened because people believe such thing is the early 12th century bold forgery appeared, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, supposedly the plan of the Jews who worked through Masonry to enslave the world. Although the Protocols has long been exposed as a forgery, it is still published in many countries around the world as the truth to this very day. Adolf Hitler picked up this theme. He blamed the problems of post-World War I Germany largely on two groups, Jews and Freemasons. He then attempted to alienate both groups of people. Subsequently, in addition to the 6 million Jews, perhaps 250,000 of Freemasons perished in Nazi concentration camps. In general, totalitarian regimes have suppressed Freemasonry. whether their orientation is fascist, Hitler's Germany, France's Spain, or Mussolini's Italy, communist Russia, or religious Iran after 1978. To make matters worse, there are millions of people today worldwide, including in the United States, who believe that the protocols is the truth. They continue to smear Freemasons, and of course the Jews, every day. Although I consider the dynamics of beliefs like this in more detail below, I shall make this summary statement here. Freemasonry is not involved in conspiracy. Masons ban discussion of partisan politics from the lodge room. Freemasons concern themselves with the personal and inner development, not political power. Masons are not in cahoots with hostile space aliens to rule the world, nor are they engaged in a millennia-long project to enslave humanity, as others claim. Of course, it is impossible, even in principle, to prove that a Masonic conspiracy does not exist. On the other hand, it is perfectly reasonable to insist for proof of a claim that something does exist. If someone makes an incendiary claim, such as claims of Masonic conspiracy, insist on saying the proof had better be something more than someone else's opinion or an unsupported statement. As the scientist and educator Carl Sagan once said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof.
I hope you enjoyed that reading from Mark E. Koltko-Rivera's work, Freemasonry Introduction. Thank you, Steve, for doing that reading. And look, one of the things you touched on, which we won't talk about too much, but we sort of give a bit of a flavour, is why don't Freemasonry, or conventional Freemasonry, why doesn't it let women into its ranks? You think that's an interesting topic?
It's an extremely interesting topic. That's why we're getting a few people on to discuss this topic. And I got posed a question by one of your learned colleagues last night, actually, Jack, as I mentioned to you in our meeting last night. A young lawyer lady posed that question, and so I sent her a link to the podcast to give her a basic understanding of Freemasonry, and she's waiting for the avid conversation to come up. So hopefully you've enjoyed that little bit of information there that I've just delivered. Yeah,
I mean, it's and as Mark says in his book, there's nothing wrong with the idea of fraternity. What's so wrong with fraternity?
Well, Boy Scouts have been around for a long time.
Exactly right.
Surely they include girls now.
Exactly right.
And there's nothing to say that might not happen in the future, but as it's touched upon, there are avenues for females in Freemasonry, isn't there?
In conventional Freemasonry there is, but that's the wonderful thing. I mean, this is something that we're going to be posing to our friends from Detroit Humane, who will be accompanying us to talk about co-masonry and some of the principles of that organisation. One of the things that we're going to probably put to them is, what about it's a philosophical question. What about the differences between masculine and feminine? Are there differences, or is that something that's an old way of thinking? These are all interesting questions, but it's good that Mark sort of provides a good introduction to some of those topics, and I'm sure it will be well received. The last reading we're doing for this episode 7, is we're going to be doing reading, once again, brought to you by the... It's a book produced by the Victorian Lodge of Research, number 218, and it's called Masonic Reflections, which is their annual publication. And this is volume 20 from 2006. And what we're doing is we're going to be reading chapter 5 of that book, or a very small portion of chapter 5, entitled "Is Freemasonry a Total Moral Philosophy?" And this is going to be delivered. This was actually delivered by Right Worshipful Brother J.D. Fergus Black. He's a past Deputy Grand Master of United Grand Lodge Victoria. And this was delivered on Friday, the 28th of July in 2006. And this article, we won't be reading all of it, but the first part covers some of the questions about our ritual and what exactly is an allegory, and why do we use King Solomon's Temple in our ceremonies. So I hope you enjoy it. Is Freemasonry a total moral philosophy? Delivered in the Lodge of Research in Victoria by Right Worshipful Brother J.D. Fergus Black, past Deputy Grand Master, on Friday, the 28th of July, 2006. Before we can integrate the allegories in the various degree ceremonies and the opening of the lodge into a total moral philosophy, we need to be able to demonstrate that they are all derived from a common basis, and that the interpretation of each is consistent with the philosophy of the order as a whole. To do that, there are three significant questions we need to be able to answer. The first is to determine how we should treat the error of fact and all the other anomalies that appear in our ritual. There are so many of them. I have no doubt that we all, from time to time, have contemplated that very question, but I am equally certain that we have not fully yet resolved it. In fact, to date, we have mostly ignored them, but is that sufficient? In each of the 3 degrees of craft masonry, reference is made to some specific aspect relating to the construction of King Solomon's temple, except for the 1st degree. Those references are bowed down under the weight of the anomalies they carry. So what is the point of alluding to King Solomon's temple if we then ignore the references on the grounds that they are anomalous? I contend that those anomalies and discrepancies are not accidental. I believe they are designed to alert us to the presence of allegories and even to assist us in interpreting the message that they conceal. What are allegories? From the time we joined Freemasonry, we are instructed that it is a system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. The significance of many of those symbols is explained in various degree ceremonies, and in the lecture on the 1st degree tracing board we are told, for example, that the square teaches morality, the level equality, and the plumb rule justness and uprightness of life and conscience. However, nowhere is there any indication that a particular segment of the rite might conceal an allegory, let alone any suggestion as to what such allegory might refer. Therefore, the first thing we need to do is establish criteria to determine whether or not the passage of our ritual might conceal an allegory. An allegory is defined as a figurative treatment of one subject under the guise of another. In other words, a situation in which the identity of an unnamed object is concealed under the description of another named or nominated object. The fact that the definition is not particularly helpful. The form of the definition is not particularly helpful. Let us rotate it marginally to say that an allegory may be defined as a situation in which the description of a nominated object is changed to a greater or lesser degree, so that the more precisely defines the other, unnamed object. This definition provides us with the means of determining whether or not a particular segment of the ritual might conceal an allegory. It can also assist us in identifying the unnamed object. Let me give you an example of an allegory that has no bearing whatsoever on Freemasonry. I shall describe as a nominated object sheep shearing sheds. These buildings are equipped with multiple machines that are jointly powered but are each independently hand operated. The buildings are designed to provide stock for the independent operators to work on. These buildings are invariably located in the midst of major cities. No, that is not a mistake. I am in reality describing share markets in the guise of sheep shearing sods. Of course, these words used in each case have entirely different meanings. The buildings, instead of being made of galvanized iron and wood, are made of concrete and steel. The machines, instead of being handheld shearing combs, are computers and phones, and the stocks, instead of being four-legged woolly animals, are share portfolios. However, I am sure you were quite happy to believe that I was describing sheep shearing sheds until you recognise an anomaly in where you believe such buildings would be located. It is just such anomalies and discrepancies that should alert us to the presence of an allegory in our ritual. If anomalies appear when the items of the ritual are used to describe the nominated object, we could assume we are all dealing with an allegory. The identity of the unnamed object will be such that the anomaly that appears when the items are used to describe the named object cease to be anomalies when they are applied to describe the new unnamed object. The interpretation of an allegory is entirely subjective, limited only by any constraints that may be imposed by the organisation that devised the allegory, and that brings us to the second question we need to resolve. Has Freemasonry imposed any such restrictions on the interpretation of the allegories concealed in its ceremony? I believe the answer to this question is an emphatic yes. Under whatever circumstances Freemasonry was initially developed, current-day craft Freemasonry commenced with the formation of the United Grand Lodge of London and Westminster in England in 1717, and virtually completed its development with the formation of the United Grand Lodge of Freemasons of England in 1813, and established a system of morality independent of, but not divorced from religion. Membership of the order is defined in the first of the charges of Freemasons developed by Dr. Anderson, a Presbyterian minister and Fellow of the Royal Society in 1723. A Mason is therefore particularly bound never to act against the dictates of his conscience. Let a man's religion or mode of worship be what it may, he is not excluded from the order, provided he believes in a glorious architect of heaven and earth, and practice the sacred dues of morality. Masons unite with the virtues of every persuasion in the firm and pleasing bond of fraternal love. They are taught to view the errors of mankind with compassion, and to strive by the purity of their own conduct to demonstrate the superior excellence of the faith they may profess. Thus, Masonry is the centre of a union between good men and true, and the happy means of conciliating friendship amongst those who otherwise have remained at a perpetual distance. Therefore, current-day Freemasonry is not a secular organisation, neither it is a religion. It is specifically designed to unite men of high morals, integrity, on the basis of their belief in the great architect of the universe, while carefully refraining from dividing them according to the nature of that belief. In other words, it is based on the concept that belief in God unites, while belief about God divides. To maintain this delicate balance, the interpretation of any moral lessons concealed in our rituals must also be non-sectarian. So now we know the constraints under which the allegories are to be interpreted, but there is still one further question we need to resolve. Are the allegories in each degree really part of one picture? It has been suggested that the first degree in Freemasonry is involved in the search for moral truth, the second degree, intellectual truth, and the third degree, spiritual truth. Freemasonry is defined in our ritual as a system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. Any suggestion that the second and third degrees differ in fundamental philosophy from the first is contrary to this definition. Our knowledge of English Freemasonry before the formation of the Grand Lodge of London and Westminster in England in 1717 is very scant, and there is no precise evidence of the content of the two degrees that were apparently worked in lodges before that time. However, it seems that part of the original second degree ceremony is now incorporated in the third degree. That would suggest that those who were responsible for developing the third degree had not simply added it to the other, existing two, but that they had materially modified those degrees to blend in with the new third degree. This view would seem to be supported by the similarity of the structures of the three degrees. In each case, the ceremonial is divided into three parts. One of these is concerned with conveying the moral principles embodied in the symbolism of the working tools. A second is concerned with conveying the moral lesson by emphasising a particular virtue, while the third part is concerned with conveying a moral lesson through the use of an allegory. We are all well aware of the moral principles embodied in the symbolism of the working tools in each degree, and that charity is the virtue emphasised in the first degree. But we are equally conscious that the virtue emphasised in the second degree is diligence, to extend our researches into the hidden mysteries of nature and science, and in the third degree, integrity, to maintain our fidelity to any secret trusted upon us, even to the point of death. But what about the allegories? Essentially, I am proposing that the allegories in each case were devised first and then parallel features of the construction of King Solomon's temple that were chosen as the nominated object whose description could be varied so as to conceal those allegories, and yet provide sufficient anomalies and discrepancies to enable an astute student to identify them. Let us accept that challenge by seeing that if we can identify and interpret allegories in the ceremony associated with the opening of the lodge and each of the three degrees. Well, that was a reading from the Victorian Lodge of Research's annual Masonic publication entitled Masonic Reflections, which is a fantastic publication which has some fantastic research. And I hope that for our listeners interstate and overseas, gives you an idea of how great the scholarly research and presentation is here in Victoria. We have a fantastic Lodge of Research. And
they do a great job. They that's an old one, but they continue to do great work.
Exactly right. And one of the great things about the Victorian Lodge of Research is that they produce such great work. But one thing we're trying to do with this podcast is that a lot of this research gets bound, given out to some lodges and some members where it can, but it gets put on a shelf.
Library shelf, yeah.
Collects dust. And this is a way of advertising some of the great Masonic researchers we have in Victoria. We're very lucky.
As we were lucky to have Brennan on kind on last week and told us a little bit about it. So it was good to get it out there now, and we'll continue to do that, won't we, Jack?
And we'll continue to support the Victorian Lodge of Research with this podcast. So hopefully we're bringing people to light through their research. Steve, I think that wraps up the episode. It's been a great episode. Thank you very much for coming back on.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm enjoying talking to all our visitors.
Well, that's exactly right. And look, before we wrap, Steve's going to wrap up by doing a Masonic toast.
Yeah, but toast the visitors.
Toast the visitors.
So all our visiting listeners out there, this is to you.
This is for you. And this is just to give you a bit of background for our non-Masonic friends. Every meeting we have, we go to have dinner, and we call it the South. And we do toasts, and toast to the Queen, and toast to our brethren, our sick and distressed brethren, and this is also a toast we do, toast to the visitors. So we'll end with that, but before we do, I just want to say on behalf of the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast, thank you very much for listening. I'm your host, Brother Jack Aquilina.
And I'm Brother Steve Austin.
And we'll speak to you on our next edition. Keep safe and stay on the level.
A toast to all our differences. A toast to common ground. A toast to what we're seeking. A toast to what we've found. To what brings us together. To what sets us apart. A toast to many different souls, united with one heart. To the visitors.
You've been listening to the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast, bringing you to light through discussions and research papers about Australian Freemasonry and the Victorian jurisdiction in particular. We look forward to speaking to you on our next edition, and until then, we are happy to meet, sorry to part, and happy to meet again.